Well, hello and welcome to our webinar today, Interviewing Techniques to Make Exceptional Hires. My name is Julie Dorr and I will be your moderator for today's event. If you notice right now there's a poll on the screen and we're asking you to fill that out prior to us actually starting the webinar, so we certainly appreciate your input. We'll be doing a couple more of these throughout the webinar. There's all sorts of new things for those that have joined us before that we're going to be trying today. Again, our presentation will last approximately 40 minutes. With the remaining time available for our questions. Of course, if during the presentation you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and send those over in the question section that's over on your dashboard, or you can email me, julie@thedorgroup.com, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar during our Q&A section. Earlier this morning, we emailed you a link to a downloadable copy of our presentation. However, if you didn't receive it, it's now available on your webinar dashboard, or you can download it from your webinar dashboard, or you can email me again and I'll send that to you right away. Also, before we get started, note that this webinar and all of the accompanying materials are protected by copyright and that the entire conference is being recorded. This presentation provides general information only and does not constitute legal advice. We recommend that you consult with your legal counsel to address any specific situation that you may have. So I'm going to close the poll right now and get started actually with the webinar itself and introduce you to our panelists. Linda Duffy first. Many of you know Linda as the president of Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Linda works with business owners and executives to provide strategic human resources direction, develop leadership talents, and increase organizational effectiveness. And of course, adding to our Ethos bench strength today, we have Kimberly Kenner. She's Ethos recruiting manager who also helps clients source the perfect candidate. She has a broad experience in talent acquisition, including recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, and succession planning. And then rounding out our trio of speakers today is attorney Marla Merhab Robinson. Marla's with the law firm Merhab Robinson, Jackson, and Clarkson, where she is a partner and head of the firm's transactional department. She primarily practices in the areas of corporate, mergers and acquisition, real estate, finance, and employment law. Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can get started. This is going to be a great webinar today. I'm interested, especially since I sometimes make some bad hiring choices.
Well, you should have us help you with that, Julie. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have a big webinar group, and we've got a lot of information, so we're just going to jump on in and get started. Put the agenda up here. You know, one of the things I'm going to get started with is talking about some steps you need to take, sort of preparing to actually go out and do some recruiting. So we are going to spend a lot of time focused on interview questions and interviewing in general and how you can recruit an exceptional hire that way. I'm going to start out with some things that we need to do sort of in preparation of that. And then as Julie mentioned, a lot of people don't even know that we have a recruiting manager at Ethos Human Capital Solutions, and so we're really excited to have Kimberly on with us because she is an expert in recruiting. I always defer to her judgment when we're doing recruiting, and that is about 50% of our practice. So I'm going to have her to be talking a lot about the recruiting, and then finally, as always, we'll rely on our legal expert, Marla Merhab Robinson, and she's going to be talking about some of the sticky situations that come up in interviews and some of the legalities around interviewing. And then, of course, as always, we'll leave some room for Q&A at the end and address any questions you have. So be thinking about those, and Julie will give you a little bit of instruction later as to how you can communicate those questions to us, because we're more than happy to try to answer those for you. So let's get started. Let's talk about when we go out to do a search for one of our clients, the first thing we do is actually sit down with them and ask them about their business goals for the next 12, 24, 5 years out, however far out they can look. I think it's so important, and I think so many people miss this step when you're recruiting. It's really important that you're not just recruiting somebody, you know, as a standalone person. You're actually bringing them into an organization, and they need to fit in a lot of different ways. They need to fit culturally, of course, with just how you do business, personality-wise and everything, but you also are bringing them in to help the company succeed in wherever it's headed. And I think people skip this step. I think they aren't very strategic about it, and so we always start by sitting down with them and asking questions like these. What are your strategic plans? Where's your business headed over the next year or two? What are the results you're looking for? Are you trending either direction? Are you going to be, growing your business, shutting down your business, selling your business? Are you getting into different product areas, different geographic areas? We spend a lot of time asking all of those questions up front, talking about the key people in place, people that are going to be changing roles. We literally just spend hours just peppering people with questions, and a lot of times I have to tell you, our clients, they don't know the answer to the questions. They haven't considered it, and so it's a really useful, valuable process to them to sit down and have to come up with answers to some of those questions. Now, we do have clients, of course, that are really good at strategic planning. They have a full plan in place, and that's great as well, but whether it's a formal plan or just a gut instinct, at least take the time up front as a first step to think about where your business is heading, because the person you're going to bring in needs to be in alignment with that. So the next step is really to identify what that future hire, those candidates you're talking to right now, must do to support those business goals, because again, you want them to be in alignment. So you figure out, okay, this is where we're headed in the next year or two, this is what our main corporate goal is for the year, and we'll give you an example or two of that in a minute. So then the question becomes, what must this new hire do to be successful? And you'll see the emphasis on the word do, because it's really not about what they have, what they need to have to be successful, it's what they need to do to be successful, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So really you're just asking, again, the question is, what does this person have to do to be successful, or what do they have to achieve to support that main business objective of yours or a sub-objective? How are you going to measure their success? Because, again, you're hiring somebody to help move the company in the direction it wants to go. So hopefully you're drilling down from whatever those main strategic goals are for the organization, you're floating those down throughout the organization so everybody is moving in the same direction. I said a second ago, it's a difference between what you have to do versus what you have to have. And so one of the questions I ask when I do this type of training is, I'll just ask, so what do Bill Gates and Steve Jobs have in common? And, if I'm doing this live, obviously, then I would take a lot of answers, and it's not just, hey, they both wear glasses, but obviously both have been successful, CEOs in billion-dollar software companies, right? Well, that's great, but here's the other thing they have in common. They have in common they're both college dropouts. And the reason I point that out is because if I were to sit down with a client and say, okay, we're going to help you hire a CEO, and I start asking, what does this person have to do? A lot of times the answers are things like, well, they have to have an MBA or a PhD, or they have to have so many years of experience. And the truth of the matter is that's not what they have to have. It's not about that, because if you had said, what do you need to do to be successful as a CEO of a billion-dollar software company, people would start giving me a list of haves, not what they have to do. So today what we want to do is get you to shift your thinking a little bit and really stay focused on what this person has to do to be successful. So let's talk a little bit about how you can measure success. So when I'm saying, okay, client, a year from now after you hire this fill in the blank, salesperson, plant manager, HR director, receptionist for that matter, how are you going to measure this person's success? How are you going to know when I come back a year from now and say to you, hey, how's Kimberly doing, and why are you such a raving fan of hers? How are you going to look back and say, oh, this is why I'm a raving fan, not because she's a nice person, but because what? How are you going to measure that? So it could be things like sales per employee, or an average sale, or customer retention, or quality, or error rate, or whatever. It could be, in Mike Kim's case, it could be the number of positions she's filled. It could be, customer satisfaction. It could be the time to fill, because that's a common measurement we have in recruiting. So think about different ways that you can measure success. And generally, I break this down into 5 different things. And this isn't on the slide in case you're taking notes. But there's a sort of an HR guru by the name of Dr. Jack Fitzens, and he came up with 5 different things. Time, things like revenue, for example, or budget. I'm sorry, time. I just went on to money. Time, like, the time to fill, as I just mentioned as an example. Money would be things like revenue, budget, things like that. Quantity, just, number of positions filled, we'll stay with that. The quality, so error rates on something, defect rates, scrap rates, and then the fifth one is human reaction. So things like customer service satisfaction survey results. It could be employee engagement results. Things that are a little bit more nebulous but are based on feedback you're getting from someone. Okay, so time, money, quantity, quality, and human reaction are sort of the overall things, and then you break them down into more specific things like the ones that you have on the screen. So let's put a specific example in place sort of to give you the backdrop, and then I'm going to turn over to Kim in a minute. She's going to take it from there about interviewing. So let's say we sit down with a client and we say, okay, what's your goal? What are some of your goals for the coming year? And they say, well, one of our goals is this year we're going to grow revenue from 8 to 10 million. Okay, it's a pretty big jump. So I'm going to ask some additional questions. Is that going to be done organically, or are you going to be acquiring another company? Is it going to be across the board or in a specific area? Are you launching a new product? Are you going into a new geographic area? What is it that you're going to do to actually get there? Okay, there could be so many different ways that you grow revenue. Is it all with one customer? Is it with multiple customers? Whatever it is, right? So I'm going to help them actually break that down. Where is that $2 million going to come from? So to give you an example, because this is a real example of a couple searches that we've done this year for the same manufacturing client that wants to grow their revenue, they were going to bring on a national account manager. So this person wouldn't be responsible for all $2 million, but you can see a large jump in the $2 million. So they do have a small inside sales staff, and they had one outside salesperson to manage the bulk of the $10 million that they want to get to. But to add that other $2 million, in part, they were going to bring on a national account manager. So when I say, what does this person have to do to be successful, this is the type of measurement I'm talking about. Is during the first year, we want this person to identify 3 new markets and drive revenue of at least $1.5 million. Okay? Now, that's really specific, right? Either they're going to sell $1.5 million or they're not. Either they're going to open up 3 new markets or they're not. And then from there, we break that down. So some of the sub-deliverables that we had for this person were to penetrate a new growth industry, find revenue of at least $500,000 per year in the first year revenue, to add a couple of large accounts with over $300K in annualized revenue, but 10 new accounts in total, so they're not just putting all of their eggs in one basket, and then also upselling existing customers with new products, right? This client also has a very specific gross profit margin of 35%, so we never lose sight of that as well. So again, when I go back and I say to the client, what does this person have to do to be successful? I'm not looking for answers like they have to have 5 years of experience selling. I'm looking for answers like they have to drive at least $1.5 million in revenue this year. Okay? So hopefully that distinction is clear. Let me give you another example from the same client. So this is a manufacturing company. And so they also would have plant manager deliverables. So this is the person responsible for production. So some of those deliverables that would help support the revenue goal, but also more in this case support the gross profit margin, were things like reducing scrap, from 2% of revenue to 1% of revenue, reducing raw material costs. Big one was increased capacity utilization for their equipment and for their employees, the labor optimization as well. So that's the last one there is, within 6 months, when they come in, identify ways to optimize the labor usage. So it's things like eliminating the use of temps, or figuring out at what point early on in the process can we convert someone from temp to hire, reducing the use of outside people. This company put in, for example, a cross-training program to help support this. So these are some of the ways that the plant manager can help put that in place. So when we go through and we get all of this information, the end product, besides actually the new hire, but before we start, the end product is what we call a success profile. And it basically has these different components to it. So it's going to be a tool that we use to send out to candidates. It could be used as a job posting. It could be used just to circulate as we're networking and we're actually sourcing candidates for the client. But it's about getting all of the people at the company, first and foremost, on the same page. That's one of the benefits. It's helping them think through their strategy, helping them think through how the new hire is going to support that strategy, but it gets all the business decision makers in line. So you don't have a situation where you're in interviews, right, or you're getting ready to hire someone and you've got one executive saying, well, I thought the person was going to do this, and you've got somebody else saying, well, I thought they were going to focus over here. Everybody is crystal clear about how this person is expected to deliver results in the first year or two. So it gets the decision makers in agreement. It becomes the basis for sourcing and recruiting candidates. As you'll see in a second, it also drives the interview questions, and then also it becomes a performance management tool once the person's on board. So we've already set everybody up for success, both the candidate and also the company. The candidates love it because they will self-select out. You don't waste a lot of time interviewing people who aren't qualified or who aren't interested, because when they see the level of specificity of those deliverables, either it lights them up, and we get people that say, oh my gosh, I can't believe how clear this is exactly me, get out of my head, this is exactly the type of job I want or what I'm good at. And then you also have the people that say, yeah, either not interested, not qualified, been there, done that, whatever, and they self-select out. And then you've got hiring managers that love it because they know how they're going to measure this person's performance when they come on board. We've already laid it out with them. They're clear about it. The candidate's clear about it. So essentially it just describes the company. It gives an overall position summary. We lay out all of those deliverables, and it could be 5, it could be 10, it could be 15. It just depends on the job. We do, of course, know that there's a cultural fit component and some other things that have more to do with preferred attributes. It might be things like a lot of our clients are family-owned businesses or founder-led businesses, and they might be small environments, for example, where maybe there's 15, 20, 30 employees and family-owned, maybe multiple family members. And so sometimes it's about asking questions around that as well, or what they would do with the level of resources they will or will not have compared to their current position and current company. If there's travel requirements, we spell those out, compensation, and then, of course, how to apply for the job. So if you're interested in seeing any of the sample success profiles, you can actually go to our website, type it in just as it is. You don't need to put in the www, and just go to our resources page, and you'll see sort of a white box in the upper right-hand corner that talks about resources, and in there you'll see a way that you can download a couple of success profile samples. So I hope that that will be of help for you. And with that, I am going to turn it over to the one and only Kimberly Kenner, Recruiting Manager for Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Take it away, Kim.
Well, thank you, and hello, everybody. The one and only, thank you. You know what, after all that work that we do, the one thing that, and I'm going to come to you from a candidate perspective, because we're graced right now in the market that we work in, especially here in Southern California, with candidates that actually are employed. Everybody's working. It's hard to find candidates, so I'm going to speak to that because it's hard enough to find the right person. All the work that you've just done, the work that we've just done. So we come to a perspective that, you know what, and most of our candidates that we speak to, by the way, by the time we get to the offer stage, have multiple offers to choose from. So I'm going to speak to a little bit about interviewing. Not just from finding the right person, but in how we treat the people. I'm very passionate about how we treat candidates and how their perspective and what their process is as well, not just you. So before we get there, though, once we've found, we worked through all this, we actually start off. Our process is, I spend a quick 15-minute phone screen when I first speak to them. Like kind of just get those make or break questions and geared towards their motivation. So I would recommend, once you have those candidates, before you just, oh, I love the resume, and you call them in there, don't waste your time. Spend a few minutes and talk to them on the phone first, or have someone on your behalf speak to them first. Find out if they even make or break those criteria that are just, must-haves, and then schedule them to come in. We also suggest to our clients and to ourselves as well that instead of having someone come back to you 4, 5, 6 times, why not consider doing a panel interview? There's a lot of benefits to doing panel interviews. Include the supervisor, include a peer if you want. Who's the decision makers. Of course, train them first, meaning the people who are doing the interviewing should know how to, and we'll speak a little bit about some of that. And doing a panel interview also kind of takes a little pressure off of everyone doing the interview, people who are inexperienced doing interviews. Plus, it gets everybody hearing the same person speaking at the same time. So once the interview is done, you can come to a consensus on what you think about this person. Doing a panel interview also keeps your candidate from having to come back 4 or 5 times. If they're working, can you imagine how many excuses they have to make to their current employer to come interview with you on 5, 4, 3 occasions when we could have done that interview at once? The other benefit of a panel interview, which is one of my favorite benefits, is sometimes when you're doing the interview, you're anticipating your next question. You're not listening to the candidate. You just want to get on to question number 2, question number 3. You have an hour and you want to get it over with. So, and that's okay. But somebody else in the room could be taking notes while you're asking the questions, or you could be taking notes while they're asking the questions. That to me is one of my favorite benefits of doing a panel interview. And then of course, however you do your interviews, make sure that the candidate and whoever their direct supervisor will be have some one-on-one time. Whether it's during that panel interview or after. So now we're going to move on to some other guidelines, what I call basic interviewing guidelines, or the Kimberly rules. No, they're not rules, they're just guidelines. But again, about the candidate, it's not just about the questions, by the way. It's not just about what am I going to ask, but it's not just about you. That's what I'm going to talk about in just a minute. I'm going to talk about first impressions versus longer impressions. I'm going to cover a little bit about ending an interview, and then why do we do behavioral interviewing, and of course doing the right thing means everybody wins. So let me start off with, it's not all about you. What do I mean by that? When you make a candidate feel welcome in your place of business, you're helping them feel comfortable. They're ready to meet you, you're ready to meet them. The other day, I'm going to use a real live example. About 2 weeks ago, and we were doing I was on site with a client. We scheduled an interview at 9 o'clock, and we had the next one at 10:30. So 9 o'clock, the candidate, by the way, was there early, and they were there at 8:40. I was there already by 8:30. So we're waiting, and we're waiting, and we're waiting. There are 3 people that were supposed to attend the interview: the president of the company, a high-level executive, and the hiring manager. So 9 o'clock comes, 9 o'clock goes. They're still not there. The owner of the company, the president, the big kahuna is still not there. By the way, this company has a receptionist with a telephone that works, mind you. So did anybody call the receptionist to tell them, oh, by the way, let those people know I'm on my way, or I'm stuck in traffic? Nobody said a word. Not a word to anyone was said. At 9:20, the president walks in the door. Hey, good morning, how are you? No apologies. Oh, I'll be right back, and just left us sitting there. Didn't explain to us anything. No, I'm sorry I'm late, or hey, I'm so sorry, or not even an apology. How about, hey, good morning, you know what, we'll be getting started in just a few minutes. I know we're running late, but we'll have plenty of time. You know, something of that nature. So about 10 minutes later, he comes back downstairs, and we're ready to start the interview. Well, the second person in the interview is still not there. They're running late. And guess what? The biggest, I can't believe it happened, the hiring manager themselves couldn't make it that day. They weren't even there, and they weren't going to be there. I felt so bad for the candidate. I didn't know what to, actually I was like, uh-oh. So I said in private to the team later, couldn't we have just rescheduled the interview? Wouldn't that have just been easier? So what kind of impression do you think that would have made upon that candidate? How would you feel? If that was you, if somebody scheduled your time to be somewhere, even if it's not an interview, how would you feel if that was you? So that's what I want you to think about. Is so if you're going to schedule an interview, make sure it's a time that fits in your schedule. Now the person's there. You know, you kind of outline the interview. Hey, we're going to talk about this today. I'm going to give you a tour of the building. You're going to meet with myself. You're going to talk with these other people. You introduce the panel, and then we're going to talk about the job. And then I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we'll wrap it up. You know, just a general overview of how that goes. So that's what I mean by it. It's not just about the questions, and it's not just about you. This next topic, the first impressions, and 5 minutes versus 30 minutes. Actually, this is one of my favorite things that I've learned from Linda. Is we all come to the table with lessons that we've learned, We all come to the table with preconceived notions, our life experiences that shape the way we think, the way we act, the way we feel. So when we first meet somebody, we're already sizing them up in the first 5 minutes. Well, when we do interviews, we probably do it even more so. We're like, because we want, again, I have an hour, I have to get to this interview, 5 minutes over, I don't like this guy. Well, Linda has taught me, actually this is a very good lesson, Linda, thank you, but to give yourself the opportunity to speak to this person a little further and put away your notion of those first 5 minutes and give them a chance to speak about their experience. Because, with our own limitations, we might actually have just overlooked an incredible diamond in the rough. We might have just overlooked our star because of our initial impression. Now, on the opposite end of that, I just told you to wait and give them a chance. There may be times when I've had this question come up so many times. What if this person is ridiculous? What if their language is awful? What if they stink like crazy? I mean, you name it. I've heard it. We've all heard it. Or they just plain out, after speaking to them for a few minutes, you realize they're never going to be able to do this job. I've made a mistake, or whatever possible reasons that can come up. How do I know when it's time I can end the interview? Let's say, for example, you have 4 people lined up for the day. The first 2 went the full hour. You're number 3, and you realize that they completely unqualified, or they start talking with some very colorful language, or a many multitude of possibilities. You can end the interview, believe it or not, at any time. There's no rule, there's no law that says you have to continue the interview ever, 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 ever. The polite next step, of course, don't be rude, but be polite, is just to simply say, you know what, I don't have any more questions for you at this time. We'll get back to you. I thank you for coming in today, and then excuse them, walk them to the door. Or you can also, if you feel the need, offer them a chance to ask, I don't have any more questions for you today. This will wrap up the interview. What questions do you have for me? You can even give them a chance to give you some question time. And then you say, thank you very much, we'll get back to you. That probably is one of the biggest things about when people are new at interviewing or uncomfortable, they're not sure. But truly, an interview, it's okay to end an interview if after you've given them a fair evaluation, it's just going nowhere. Now we've talked about how to treat the candidate. It's not about you, it's about them. And this next part I want to talk about is the type of questions that we're asking and why should we ask these type of questions. We typically use behavioral interviewing. And I'm going to actually go back to some of Linda's examples previously in our conversation in just a few minutes, but why should we do those type of interview? Behavioral interviewing actually is popular. It's been around since the 70s. AT&T's used it. Accenture has used it since, no joke, since like 1972. It is the premise behind it, is that it becomes an accurate predictor of their future performance. So a statistic, I was doing a little bit of research on behavioral interviewing, and I found on some of the research that, in fact, it said that 55% predictive of future job behavior, while traditional interviewing, like just kind of, hey, so tell me a little bit about yourself, is only about 10% predictive. So based on the way they're answering your questions is a good indicator of how they'll do on the job. That's why we ask those type of questions. Another benefit of, and I apologize, I just got sidetracked myself. And I'm going to give you some examples. We use, by the way, behavior interviewing questions to evaluate a candidate's experience, to evaluate their behaviors, so we can determine their potential. Here's a good example. Thank you, Linda. Earlier, Linda was talking about the national account manager. For example, we were looking at the deliverable of, the actual sales deliverable first year, identify 3 new markets. So here's some questions that are designed to dig into a little bit about how they're going to accomplish that for you. Give me an example of a new market you penetrated and the steps you took to do so. How much revenue did you bring in last year? What's the largest growth in revenue, et cetera, et cetera? How many accounts do you manage at one time? If you stick to the deliverables, you'll easily identify the candidate who can help you. Let me, for example, how much revenue did you bring in last year, Linda? Linda says, oh, I brought in about $20,000. Well, what about the job before? How much did you bring in? Oh, about $15,000. So is this person really going to be capable of bringing you $1.5 million? Well, maybe it's the type of customer. Maybe you want to dig in. Well, how was that revenue generated? What were you actually doing to produce? Where was that revenue coming from? Follow up on that question before you eliminate that possibility. But maybe there's a reason that their markup is only 5% instead of 30%. So is it really about the volume, the amount? But so dig a little bit deeper. But those are some really good examples. One of my favorite ones, so tell me how many accounts you brought in last year. How much business did those accounts bring to your company? What did you do to win that business? Are some other possibility questions. So again, I'm sticking to what? I'm sticking to what they do, not necessarily what they have. Here's another example when we talked about the plant manager earlier. Now these questions are designed for someone in a production facility or an operations background. But one of the deliverables we gave you an example was within 6 months, identify methods of optimizing labor usage, etc. So here's some questions that we would use to interview this plant manager. So what is your philosophy on the use of temporary labor? And I'm going to stop for a second and ask you to think about this. Why do you think I would ask the question that way? As opposed to, so, George, you don't like to use temporary labor, do you? Do you see the difference of the question? The difference is I don't want to guide him in how to answer the question, because what if I don't want to use temporary labor, but my last plant manager never hired his own people, so he'd rack up a whole entire huge bill for temp labor because he was too lazy to hire new people. Well, I don't want to tell this person that's what I want someone who has a definite philosophy about it. I think they have their definite need, but I want to hear what their philosophy is without guiding him to the answer. So that's why we ask the question, so what is your philosophy? Not, so you don't like temporary labor, do you? Another example back to this question is, in your current position, what steps have you taken to eliminate temporary labor? Well, now I'm asking, what have they done to do that? What is your current usage of overtime? Again, you're looking for their practices and their habits. In the past, how did you reduce overtime hours? As opposed to, so how did you reduce overtime last year? No, I want to know how they reduced overtime. What did they do? Again, it ties right back to this deliverable. Some other examples I want to share with you are more about their behaviors, more about their competencies is another word that we use. Some examples are characteristics is another word. Some examples that we will use like critical thinking, self-starter, willingness to learn, self-confidence, teamwork. Again, we choose some of these behavioral style questions that are tied to the characteristics that go with someone that can produce, that could go with someone who can run a plant. Example, so resourcefulness to me was a good example for both those examples. So we actually gave you an example here of how we take some of those questions, some probes that you can use, and then we also give you a way to evaluate their answer. We build this into what we call an interview guide. So describe a recent situation where you overcome major obstacles to get something sold. And then you're talking to somebody who's, had some experience. Well, give me some examples of that challenge. What did you do to overcome it? Or perhaps you're talking to someone who just wants to do sales. They're brand new. Well, here's some questions for you. Well, what do you foresee as your initial challenge in entering sales? Now you're looking at how they're thinking, how they're processing. Well, how do you plan to overcome it? Do they have a plan? And they could be fresh out of school and excited about doing sales, but you want to find out. So then we give you a way to actually evaluate the answers, and you'll see that on the bottom. Another example, competitiveness. No, we're not competitive. Another example, so tell me about a time you came in second and how that make you feel. In this case, what we're trying to find out is, are they really competitive? Are they a hunter? If they're happy with losing, or they don't like to lose, or they don't want to come in third place, this really kind of tells you what type of salesperson that they are. Maybe you don't need a hunter. Maybe you just want someone who's a little soft-hearted. But maybe you want someone who's a total, I've got to win, I want to close the deal. Shows you that they're going to do what they have to do to be first in a way that's not aggressive or assertive, but in a way that's successful. So tell me about time. Well, now I want to know more. Well, what was the outcome when you did that? What did you do about that? Did it change how you approach similar situations? My point is, before I go on to the next point, whether you're choosing these type of characteristics, or you're choosing to dig into the success profile and asking, there's a point of all these type of open-ended questions. They're not yes or no questions. there actually is a purpose to this. Not only does it give you some more information about what they can do for you, but it also keeps you safe. It keeps you from going off on questions that have no relevance to the interview. It keeps you on track. It gives you a very, very, very solid tool to be able to evaluate evenly all candidates. And yes, you should ask candidates the same questions. If you have 4 people that you're interviewing, ask all 4 questions. Excuse me. Ask all 4 of your candidates the same exact questions. Okay. Oh, this is a big one for me, Linda. After you're done interviewing, get back to your candidates. I don't know why, but this is my personal opinion, but to me, not getting back to a candidate after you've interviewed them in person is a form of bad manners. It's bad business, in other words, on multiple levels. From an employment and branding standpoint, it not only does it impede rejected candidates from ever applying to your future posts, because maybe that might not be the right job for them, but maybe a future job will, but it does the same for anyone those candidates talk to, and trust me, they will talk. About their, oh my gosh, I had this awful experience with the company, the manager didn't show up, they never called me back, it was awful. And trust me, word of mouth is big. They talk, and they talk nowadays on social networks very loudly. Remember that also your candidates could be potential customers. They could be a potential somewhere else in your company. So this lack of, to me, a professional courtesy is a reflection on the company. So let's give them a positive reflection. Let's get back to it. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a lengthy conversation. It could be a quick email, but just some form of communication. Get back to your candidates so that you have a positive experience walking away. They have a positive experience walking away. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it over to Marla and let her talk about some of those sticky situations that come up during interviews and how to handle them.
Thank you, Kimberly. Wow, what an incredible amount of great information on interviewing and great questions. And I wish all interviewers would take that to heart and really try to learn that. One of the things you said about keeping them safe, I'm going to follow that with keeping you safe from legal claims. And so we're going to talk quickly about the legalities of interviewing. But before I do, one of the things that I think we need to cover is, that, because it goes to legalities actually as well, is overpromising. If you're asking questions, you're not going to be making promises. And unfortunately, many interviewers overpromise. They promise terms of employment. Oh yeah, you'll be here in 10 years, and then you'll be in this position, and you'll have this pay. You don't want to do that because it could create a legal claim of a breach of contract. You want to keep the questions related to the job and, to Kimberly's point, to the behaviors necessary to succeed in the job and the ability to meet those deliverables that Linda spoke about. We've attached here a link, or we've put here on your slide a link to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing's publication, which lists acceptable and unacceptable inquiries. There are some exceptions, I will tell you. So if there's any question when you look at that list about those exceptions, you reach out to Linda or me or Kimberly. For example, age. There is a list of questions you can't ask if it's going to give you information about that person's age that you can determine that they're over 40. An exception to that would be if you were hiring a bartender. You need to know that they're of legal age to be a bartender. Any question which is prohibited on an application is also going to be prohibited in the interview process. You must avoid any questions that can be interpreted as discriminatory, because if they can be, you've just opened the door to some potential claims. You've got to keep objective records of your interview process. Don't take notes of information that comes out of the interview that may be discriminatory. So even if the candidate lets you know that they're married, don't put that in your notes. Candidate is married, because if you choose not to hire that candidate, that may be the basis for a claim. Don't put subjective terms like wasn't right for the job. That doesn't tell us anything. That could be something that they could lead to a discriminatory claim. Say unable to work weekends if the job requires that they work weekends. So here, let's move on to some examples of tough situations that come up all the time. And we're not going through every prohibition. We don't have time. But these are just common ones. So national origin, examples of acceptable questions or statements regarding their verification. Do you have the legal right to work in the U.S.? and what their languages are, if they're applicable to the job. If some jobs require you to be able to speak certain language. What's unacceptable is questions to birthplace, nationality, lineage, ancestry. And then a common example of how this comes up is, wow, you have an unusual name. What's the origin of your name? That can lead to the unacceptable response, which is, oh, my name is German, or my name is Iranian, which could open the claim to a discrimination claim. Another example is marital status. You can ask for a statement of company policy regarding work assignment of employees who are related. Do you have a brother or sister who works here? Or do you have any family relatives who work here? Because the company has a policy against that, or we have to put you in different departments. You can't ask anything that's going to result or indicate their marital status or their sexual orientation or their gender identification, or the question regarding whether they have children, the ages of their children, whether they want to have children. And this is something that we see comes up all the time, because interviewers often have a bias towards either married people or single people or parents or those without children, or the age of children, because they think, well, if I have somebody who has young children, they're not going to come to work on time, they're going to have to attend school functions. So you can't even ask if they've made provisions for childcare if you do find out that they have children. A lot of times people volunteer information. If they volunteer that they have children, you can't follow that up with, well, who's going to take care of your children while you're at work, or who's going to drive your children to school? You can't ask those types of questions. Another example that we see often, and that really is the area of litigation is exploding, is disability discrimination. You can only ask if they can perform the job-related functions. Can you perform the functions of this job? You can then follow up if they say, I need some help. What accommodations are necessary for you to perform the essential job functions? And you can let the offer be contingent on passing a job-related physical exam, as long as the physical exam is related to the essential functions of the job. So, for example, if your job is just to sit in a chair and answer the phone as a receptionist all day, you can't then require them to have a physical that requires them to lift 50 pounds. What's unacceptable in this area is you can't inquire into their health at all, not their general health or any medical conditions or disabilities, unless it's job-related and consistent with a business necessity. Pregnancy. Oh, this is a fun one that everybody hates. I get calls all the time from clients saying, I just hired this gal and she didn't tell me she's 6 weeks pregnant or 8 weeks pregnant or 3 months pregnant, and I didn't know. Well, it's a good thing you didn't know, because if you had made the decision based on knowing and it was a no, it could be a problem. So you can ask about the ability to perform essential job functions, especially if you know they're pregnant, and you can ask if any accommodations are needed, and then do a determination of whether or not they're reasonable accommodations or whether or not they would cause undue hardship to the company. And those are the only two. That's the only situation in which you couldn't or could not hire them, is if the accommodations weren't reasonable or if it caused an undue hardship. You cannot ask anyone about their plans to get pregnant. If you've got a woman of a certain age who maybe you just told you she just got married, or you noticed a wedding ring, you can't ask about the marital status, remember, but you also cannot ask about whether they're getting pregnant, or whether they're pregnant now, whether they have plans to get pregnant, what they plan to do after a child is born, if they are currently pregnant, and that's clear. So this is a very sensitive area. Lots and lots of claims brought for discrimination in that area. And the last one is the most difficult, because this area of law is really in flux. And that is criminal records. And when I say in flux, the states are different than the feds and the states are different than the EEOC. So I'm just going to go through this a little bit. Acceptable questions are job-related questions about convictions, not arrests, which have not been sealed or expunged. You cannot ask about arrests, or detentions, or diversion programs, or convictions for marijuana more than 2 years old, or convictions sealed or dismissed. Now, the EEOC has held that having a blanket ban on criminal convictions is disproportionate impact on blacks and Hispanics. And so they have said, nope, we're not going to have this. And because of that, the states and Congress actually said, there are certain occupations where you can absolutely have a ban on any felony, and those are mostly involving kids, but also transportation, home aides, those types of things. But there's actually 800 occupations that between Congress and the states, it's estimated to be 800, have said, yeah, you can have this absolute ban. And as a result of that, the EEOC updated its guidance in 2012, and it's on their website if you want to look at it. But in a nutshell, because I know we're running out of time, they're still stating no blanket ban, but you can do it only if it's job related, and you've got to confirm the accuracy, and don't use what's called ban the box or check the box on the application. Now, many still do. It's okay to do that unless you're a public company, because in January of 2014, a ban the box a law went into effect for public sector employers from asking about criminal convictions. However, I would prefer that you not use a box and you just put a listing if you've been convicted of a felon. Answer yes or no. It's the same as a box, but it gets you a little bit around, at least it opens up an argument for you. And with that, I'm 2 minutes behind. We're going to turn it over for questions and answers.
Well, thank you very much, ladies. That was, it just is making my head spin. I'm sitting there thinking of all those questions I shouldn't ask or what I need to ask and whatnot. So thanks again for sharing that information. And as I mentioned, you know, I'm going to have some of you guys do some work before we actually get to questions right now. Right now I'm launching a poll, and I'm asking basically, when it comes to conducting interviews, how are you ready? In other words, how, you know, what do you guys do to get ready for these specific interviews? So it's a nice segue into our question and answer. And while you're answering that poll, let me cover that really quickly. We do have a Q&A session that's going to last approximately 10 minutes. You may, and some of you have already done that, you've emailed me directly with your questions, and it's julie@thedoorgroup.com. Feel free to use that. That's fine. In addition, there's the question section that's on your dashboard of your webinar. There's an empty box at the bottom. You just type in your question. You can either send it to me privately or send it to all, and I will read those aloud for Marla and Linda and Kimberly to answer. And actually, I got a couple, and Linda, I'm going to direct them right to you, if you don't mind, if you're on.
Yep.
We've got two questions that I'm going to just hit for you. The first one is from April, and she's asking, you know, what are the different types of searches, or how do we get someone to help us with recruiting? I think Kimberly's part of the presentation got them thinking. And since we had this slide up, I thought, oh, I'm just going to turn this over, and maybe you can help folks understand how they can, you know, hire someone or get a consultant in to help them with their recruiting efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to close the poll, I think we have a slide up on how our company can help, but I can speak to that.
Absolutely help me. Thank you for reminding me to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, in our case, and I'm sorry I didn't hear the name of the person who asked the question, but in our case, you know, there's different ways that we help our clients. We do only what we call retained search. So a couple of things to know about recruiters out there if you haven't used them before. There are recruiters that are known as contingency recruiters, where you could call it out to, you know, 5 or 10 of them, and they could all work on the search for you, and then they're going to fling resumes your way, and if you pick one of their people, then you're going to pay them a fee. We don't work that way. We want a relationship with our clients. We want to understand their business. You could see when I was talking up front about really understanding their strategy. We like to develop a relationship with them, so we only do retained search, meaning we have a relationship with that client, and we're the only firm that is working to fill that position. We do offer a 1-year guarantee on most jobs, so that's what you're getting in exchange for that, basically. The fee is relatively the same. It's going to be 20% of the first year's comp. There's other ways we can help, though. We have what we call an 80-20 search. It's great if you have multiple openings. If you have to hire 10 of something, right? Like we did this for a project manager position. They were going to hire 5 or 6 project managers. So for one flat fee, we did everything up to, but not including the in-person interviews, found them, you know, pre-qualified 20 people. They could hire 1, they could hire 20. It's their, you know, their intellectual property at that point. So that's another thing. We do some hourly consulting, like let's say you just wanted our help posting an ad or doing pre-screens or you know, filtering through some people or maybe doing some sourcing or something. We can do that on an hourly basis. We also have access to over 1,800 skills-based testing. So let's say you want somebody, some of our clients that we help recruit, they want to test all the candidates for, you know, Excel or Outlook or anything. I mean, it could be anything. And we're happy to send you a list if you're interested in that. And then finally, you know, we can do interview training for your managers or other people to help them develop some of those skills. So that's how we can help. In general, I think using recruiters is great if you need an extra set of hands, if you want some expertise, if you have a unique position you want filled that's not run-of-the-mill, something like that where you don't know how to approach it, or they have a unique set of qualifications, or you just, you know, again, you may just not have the expertise or not have the time to do it, and so it's a great thing that you can carve out.
Well, good. Thank you very much. Linda, still one more thing, and I know we're working on your Ethos website, but Maggie's wondering how to access the success profiles. There seems to be a login that's required. And
yeah,
I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, right now that's how it's still set up. So you can go there, and it's just, you can just create, like, it creates an account, which doesn't really do anything. We just set it up that way. We had grandiose plans a long time ago for that. We never sort of built that out. But if you just go and click on that, if you want to, if it's easier for you, just email me and say you want the samples, and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that might be easier. So again, Linda's email address is actually in the presentation, so feel free to access that and then just send her an email. Doris has a good question. I think if you know that a candidate does not fit in culturally with your organization after meeting them and continue to, to apply for all different jobs, how do you discourage them from applying again without exposing the company to risk?
Yeah, great question. I think you have to be really careful because it depends on what you mean by that. And it's a bad week to ask that to me and Kim, because we're having a situation with one of our clients right now, to be honest with you. We're doing a retained search for an outside salesperson, and we're presenting them with candidates that we think are really qualified, that are passing their tests that they're using, and everything, and then they meet them, and then they come up with some excuse about why the person's not a good fit, and we're starting to question whether or not they're doing it because, the candidate the other day, for example, was probably a 50-something-year-old African-American male. And I hate to say that, but I'm starting to question that. So it depends on what you mean by not a good cultural fit. One of the things I like to do is I like to actually build in questions around company values. At some point, if you just continue to keep applying, you're just going to keep rejecting them. You can have the conversation, but you can also just say, look, we've looked at you for different positions, and we just don't think that you're a good fit for this company, and just not go into any details about it. If you really...
Linda, are you there? I do believe we just lost Linda. Sorry about that, folks. We're going to move on here real quick. We've got Kimberly. We had a question for you. You mentioned getting back to candidates. Do you get back to all that apply, or just those that come in for an interview?
I try to do both, but what I was referring to earlier was after you've interviewed them, after you've spoken with them in person, that's when you should go out of your way to at least thank them for coming, let them know your decision, we've moved on, we've chosen another candidate or whatever. That's, to me, is the ones that are most important to get back to. But, because, there's some jobs where you have 100 people apply. Are you going to send 100 emails? If some people have a system, an actual, big companies have big complicated applicant tracking systems that do that automatically, but most of our clients are small companies and it's all manual. So no, you don't have time for that. You could always do a mass email if you feel that's important. I just email everybody that applied, hey, thank you very much, if we're interested, we'll call you. Just keep it simple. But I'm speaking about the ones you've actually interviewed.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. Marla, I think this one's probably more for you. What do you do when candidates volunteer that, like criminal information, or, how should you handle that as you're in the interview process and they said, oh, yeah, I had a DUI, or, I had this issue? How should someone who's doing the interview handle that?
Well, if they provide the information voluntarily, you can follow up on the information. You can ask questions about it. And we didn't talk about it, but I know it's come up with Linda before, where you have a candidate who you discover either because they have volunteered it or through a background check that they have an arrest. but not a conviction, you can ask questions about that. And if that arrest is tied to something, essential job function, you can make a determination based on that. The least risky way to handle it is to let the employee know that their background check is still pending, and an offer won't be made until it's determined. And actually, the less riskiest would be to hire them anyways and let them know if the conviction comes through, you're going to let them go. But sometimes you can't, because it depends on what the type of criminal charge is, and you do have the right to ask questions about it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Oh, good. You're back, Linda.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. It kicked me off my computer, but I'm back on the phone. So yeah, let me tag team on that, because Ashley, Marla, and I were talking about a client situation I had a week or two ago where my client is based here in Southern California, but they've got people in Minnesota. Minnesota is one of the ban-the-box states, and so what that means is there's about 13, I think, so far, states who have passed the ban-the-box law. As Marla mentioned, it's in California, but only for public entities, so private employers don't have it yet. So one of the things you have to be careful of is at what point in time during the interview process you're asking these questions. And, my application form for California employers has a question on there. Like Marla says, it excludes the marijuana convictions more than 2 years old and traffic offenses or whatever. But sometimes that information comes out. In this particular client's case, it was for a Minnesota employee. The background check revealed an arrest, and the person had not gone to court yet, so it was the court date was scheduled for after their proposed start date. And so it caused us to go back and rethink the whole process. Because they're in a ban-the-box state, what we did is we're coming up with an addendum that they can use with their application, and we're going to note on it that you only answer that conviction question at the time of the interview or after, but it cannot be asked before you meet the person, like for an interview. So it can't just be on every application submitted, but it can be at the time of interview. So we're carving it out, making an attachment to that.
Okay, great. All right. Well, unfortunately, folks, that is all the time that we have for questions. Again, you have email addresses for all 3 of our speakers today. Feel free to contact them directly. And then for some of you that have put into the Q&A, I will be sending you the presentation as soon as we conclude our webinar today. As we're going out, though, Linda, I'm going to ask you to close. I'm going to also do one more poll with just asking you how many people you intend to hire this year. So if you could go ahead and fill that out for us as Linda walks us out and closes up the webinar today, I would greatly appreciate that.
Thanks so much, Julie. Great as always. And thanks, Kim, for joining us today. We are going to actually take the month of August off. Not the entire month, unfortunately, but we are not going to schedule an interview for next month. So we did have on that last slide, so you have it in the handout, the date in September. We're still finalizing which topic that's going to be, but go ahead and mark your calendar for that, and we'll be getting the notice out to you shortly so you can sign up and attend whatever webinar topic we choose. And as always, if you have any suggestions for webinar topics or any burning issue you're facing with and you would like some more guidance on, do me a favor and shoot me an email with that, because we're always looking for topics. We want to make sure that all of our webinars are of use to our clients and everybody else on the call today. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us, and have a nice August, and we'll see you in September.
Can I just clarify, Linda? You said no interviews in August. I think you meant no webinars.
Oh, no webinars. Sorry, no webinars.
I think you might be
no interviews in August. Yeah, no, unfortunately, no. Or fortunately, no. Maybe I should say no. We're definitely working in August. We're taking the month off from webinars, and then we'll see you back in September.
Okay,
September
great.
23rd.
And I just put that up on the screen real quick after I closed the poll. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our speakers.
Thank you, everyone.